Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop, and this week we're going to be taking this rotating flip cart and turning it into a new cart for my trend router table. Roll the intro. So welcome fellow woodworkers to an epic build video, and I did something slightly unusual for this one. I actually designed a rough plan of what I wanted to build, and I did that very deliberately because I wanted to make sure that I'd spaced everything out in the best way possible. After I'd done that, the next thing to do was to get out the piece of wood that I'd have lying around the garage workshop for quite a long time. I'm quite glad it's out of the way, to be honest, because it was right in the way. And then I went to the Parkside plunge saw to get this cut to exactly the right dimensions. I have to say, despite a couple of really clear cuts, I wasn't able to cut this as true as I would want it to be, which was a bit of a surprise. I found that the saw played around a lot in the track. There is a bit of movement on the Parkside plunge saw, but it played around in the track a little bit, and as a result one end was off a little bit, so I actually had to correct that with a combination of a pull saw and just a little bit of a sort of sand with a sanding block. But I got the wood cut down to the sizes that I want. Again, this wood has been lying around for a while, which meant that unfortunately it was bowed quite a bit, and you'll see that's a common theme throughout the video, because I was always fighting against the bowing, as it were. After I'd done that and I'd got all of the pieces cut, the next stage was to get them trimmed down to the exact size that the cabinet was going to be. Obviously I'd taken some really accurate measurements at the beginning, which really did help. When I ran them through the table saw, as you can see, I kept checking all the way through to make sure that the measurements I had were as accurate as they could be, because I wanted this to be a quality cabinet. When I'd done the sort of main panels, I just went on then and cut a few stretchers, which I used in the project, and you'll see where they're used throughout. When I'd done the stretchers, it was time to have the pocket hole session. There were a few on this build, hadn't had many for a while on the garage workshop. And then it was a case of connecting it together to make sure that I could get it as straight and true and even as I could. So I really did take my time doing this part of the build. And when I was hooking this together, I was really thinking about the internal spaces. As you'll see a few times in the video, I used either the internal stretchers or a couple of properly cut out to the right size blocks as spaces, just to make sure everything was right. And obviously I clamped everything up using my fake woodpecker right angled guys that you can see. I picked these up from Temu, quite expensive for Temu I think, but they are really nice quality, made of brushed aluminium. They help to keep everything nice and straight just while I put the pocket hole screws in. There's quite a lot of pocket hole screws in this build, and I don't apologise. I'm not one of these people that agrees with the current trend that pocket holes don't have a place in joinery. I really think they do. As I was hooking this all together with the pocket hole screws, though, I did become more and more conscious of the bows. You can see in that clip the wood was bowed actually quite a lot, and I knew at some point along the line I was going to need to address that issue, which thankfully I managed to do. I continued to measure all the way through the build here, and here I'm just putting some spacings for the drill holes, which you'll see in a minute, and I'm just trying to get them sort of roughly in the right place, to be honest. I did have this on the bench and I was on the top of it, hence the sort of down view that you can see, but I was conscious that I really wanted to hook this together the best way I could to keep it as strong as possible. So the next stage was to actually mark and cut out the sort of template that the router table was going to fit in, and again all this project is all 18mm hardwood plywood. So I got it all marked out, laid it up exactly as I wanted it to be, and it gave me a really good sort of transference line. And then I went to the Parkside plunge saw. I've never done this before. I had no idea how it was going to turn out, and to be fair, it turned out a lot better. Certainly turned out a lot better than my finger did from finishing that off with the pull saw, as you can see. So, fellow woodworkers, you would have just seen me cut that out. I've never done anything like that before, and to be honest, I thought it was going to be an absolute disaster, but it hasn't turned out too bad. But what you can see, I'll try and give you a close-up, is how bowed this piece of wood is, which is actually going to be the top. When I hold it down on one side, I've got at least probably getting on for 15 mil gap between that and the flat piece of wood. I haven't offered up the trend table yet. This is the first time, so let's see if it fits. Well, it definitely fits. To be fair, there is quite a bit of gap all around the edge from the cuts, and actually the gap is about the width, the kerf of the blade, so that is probably down to me. But the good thing is it does fit. The gap around the edge I'm not too worried about, to be honest, because it will soon get filled up with sawdust anyway. And when this is all leveled off, I don't think you'll see as much of a gap. And like I said, where there is a gap, it'll either get filled with sawdust or it might even let some of the sawdust vent off. So what I'm going to do now is put on the bottom of this ring the edge that's going to hold this in. I'm going to use a sort of sliding in system. So I'm going to turn this over, and then I'm going to clamp it down to keep it nice and flat. I'm going to put this in, level this piece of wood on the bottom, then I'll know what sort of a ridge I've got to make to go on it. So let's do that now. So, as I explained, the next stage was to cut out a couple of what I would call sort of edging strips, really, and they were there to help the table stay exactly lined up. It was an 8mm gap, so I literally just ran the wood through my table saw, got it to the right height, and then when I was happy with the 8mm clearance, had cut one side, I just cut a sort of groove. You'll see in a minute, it's a sort of L shape, really. It was also really hot. We're having a bit of a hot spell in the UK, which is unlike us, so apologies if you see me all red-faced and sweating during the course of this video. It was 27.5 degrees in the garage workshop, so quite hot. So there you can see the sort of channel that I'd cut in the piece of wood, and I literally just attached it to the sort of frame underneath, and it was sort of friction and gravity that was holding it in place from the top. I knew this wasn't foolproof, because obviously when I'm lowering, raising and lowering, or raising up the router, it's going to be quite difficult, because if it gets under too much pressure, it'll just pop the wood out of the top. So I'm going to rely on a little bit of gravity for that, and obviously when I come to show you the mechanism later, I wasn't as worried about that as I first thought I was going to be. So having done a couple of those like longer brackets, I just did a couple more here just to sort of fix so I didn't have that big swathe of wood, because obviously there are parts underneath that I don't really want to sort of cover up as much as possible. Certainly I've got to keep the clearance for the handles that move the fence up and down. So I just pre-drilled everything. Every single thing you see in this video pretty much has been pre-drilled. I lost count of the amount of pre-drills I did. There were literally dozens and dozens, but I pre-drilled them all. When I was happy with them, I just popped a few of them in place, again pushing the tension. As you can see there, I clamped up, due to the bowing, I clamped up the frame to the OSB that I've got at the bottom. That OSB is as absolutely straight as a die. It's one of the only pieces of wood I've got that's not got any bow in it, but I clamped it down to keep it as level as possible, and then I put in the screws, and again I just spaced them out. There's no sort of real method to the madness. It's just different things in different places for different reasons, so nothing too major. There you'll see I took one off because I was a little bit worried about the clearance at the back. With, you can see the cutout on the router table there, which is where the handles slip in for the fence. So all of that done, plugged them, got them all plugged up, got them all in, and then I made the really conscious decision to not try it out until I'd spoken live to camera, which as you can see when I turned it over, it fitted, but there were some gaps, some quite significant gaps. But there, I tried it out and it fitted really, really well. I was super impressed. If anything, it was a little bit lower than I thought. So, fellow woodworkers, so far it's gone pretty straightforward, as you will have seen. I've just made some brackets for the actual trend table, and as you'll see as you just seen with the spirit level, I've just leveled up. Now in some places there's actually quite a significant gap, in other places there isn't. So for example, round the back here it's almost completely 100% level, whereas down here there's quite a significant groove. At the front it's pretty much okay, but this part of the wood, as you can see, is actually bent, which is not helping. Now I did think that might potentially be an issue, so I have got a piece of wood here which I'm going to put underneath. The problem that I've got, the slight problem that I've got, is obviously the on and off box, which to be honest isn't a problem. I can mount it in here and I can use it to cover the front, but this is definitely sagging at the top here and it needs reinforcing. The other issue is obviously the gap around the edge is much bigger in some places than others, but again I'm not too worried about that. But I have got some shims, and I might actually just cut some wood shims when I've leveled it off. I might just put a couple of shims in there, because it hasn't got to be perfect, hasn't got to look perfect, it's got to be level. The big problem that I have noticed is when I get this level on this side, so this is now completely level with this edge, front and back, this side there is quite a significant difference. You can actually feel when you run your hand along, you can feel how bowed this piece of wood is. Now, how I was originally going to do this was pocket holes, but I'm actually thinking I might have to drill from the top and screw in and go down that way, because I don't think I'm going to be able to get that level without releasing this from this clamp and actually sort of physically pulling it out to straighten it, which again is not an issue. It's not what I wanted to do, but it isn't an issue. I have got a little bit of flexibility around how I actually put it together, but to be fair, this panel that's here now, this stretcher, is just there to sort of help it stay together. I could even put that stretcher on the front if I wanted to, and then attach the power supply to that. So overall, nothing majorly to worry about, but there is quite a lot of fiddling that I've got to do here, some fettling in definitely on this, but my main concern is just how far that's drooping down basically, which I do need to address that. So I'm going to think about a way, because I've got these clips at the front, I can't push this batten right up to the top. If I could do that, that would obviously stop that issue, but I don't think I can do that. So I'm going to have a little bit of a think, but so far so good. So when I'd finished thinking, I decided that the best thing to do was to hook on the stretcher now to the frame to give it the rigidity that it needs. You can see I left a gap either side to fit it in, but it fitted absolutely perfectly, and it was very, very, very flush one side, not so much on the right hand side as you're looking at them, but again, as I just explained, with the drilling it down and fixing it from the top, it gives me the ability to straighten some of that bowing just by the sort of sheer force of moving wood and then quickly screwing it in place. And when I'd done that, I just attached the stretcher underneath, just a couple of pocket hole screws. I think these are 28mm pocket hole screws, but that lower stretcher that you can sort of see there, that's not staying there, that's just there to sort of help keep it together. I was then back on the stool for my overhead screwing down, and I literally just I marked out 3 sort of places where I just wanted to put long screws, and these are significant, these screws. For me, they're very long screws, not ones I use very often. And because I had got good quality clamps and long clamps, I was able to keep everything in order in the way that I wanted it to be, so that when I screwed it down, it was exactly flush, which it was. The next thing to do was just run over the level, and I was very pleased to say it was nice and level. It was raised up, in fact, which took out a lot of the necessity for shimming later on, which is something that I thought I was going to be spending a lot of time doing, but actually I didn't need to do that. Next stage was just to knock in a couple of little shims on the side, as I mentioned a minute ago. Just had a couple of off cuts of MDF, and I just put them in, and actually it gave me a really nice little bit of tension, which was just what it needed to sort of help keep that in place. So, fellow woodworkers, I've put the plate with the router back in, and I've just marked the sides, which are at the ridge at the bottom of the router. And if you watch the video, my review of the table, which I'll put a link in the description, to get it to work, I fully extended the router, or fully compressed the router I should say, and locked it on. But obviously the difficulty with that is you only get one height, and if you want to adjust it, you have to loosen off that, gradually get it to where you want it. And somebody in the comments, can't remember who it is, I'll try and put it on the screen if I can remember, said that they've got a similar setup and they use a jack for theirs. So I went to Argos and I've bought this really cheap scissor jack, I think you call it. So I'm going to put a little shelf on there, and I'm going to use the scissor jack to adjust the height of the router up and down. Now I'm going to do it this way because here in this section I've got future plans for that part, and because of the way the router is sat, it's exactly in the middle of the unit. So I could have perhaps switched it around maybe and changed the plate to have it going long ways, but it suits me it being this way. So I'm going to put a little shelf in here now, put a little side bit on here for the project that I'm going to be doing later on, and then I'm going to fix the router in. Now at the moment this has just got a very basic clamp, so what I'm actually going to do is just make it some sort of connector to go on there, because obviously if I just leave it like that, yes it will work, and I can actually see it's moving up now. Yes, it will work, but obviously it won't be great. So that's the plan of action. Let's see how we get on with it. It was then back to the table saw, this time to start cutting the plywood for the internal shelf, which was going to be the key to the mechanism. I also used some really chunky CLS timber, which you'll see in a minute, to sort of make the, I don't know, the brackets for the shelf is probably the best way to describe it, but I did use some quite chunky wood on that, and I took my time to make sure it was absolutely as flat and level as it can be. I then put in a couple of spacers, as I said earlier. You'll see a few spacers used in this video, because this bit in particular, which is going to be an upcoming video, I want to make sure this is exactly the right width. I then jumped back on the pocket hole jig, and I'd previously marked where these places need to go, because they're in a little bit of sort of odd places, so that they, you know, lined up with stretchers and lined up with the top and bottom and lined up with the top. But I just hooked them all in, and when I'd fixed all the pocket hole screws, I was pleased actually, because it was incredibly level. It didn't need much fettling at all. In fact, it was only the back that had slightly sort of moved out. I then went back to the table saw and cut the next piece of wood that I needed, and there is the sort of the arms, as it were. I don't know what's the best thing to call them, but basically they're what the shelf is going to rest on. Then I pre-drilled, screwed them in. Again, here I put in a few heavier duty screws, because this is obviously going to take a significant amount of weight, and obviously the pressure of using the jack to move the router up and down. When that was done, I just connected them, really straightforward. Again, I used another spacer to get this exactly the right height, and then I literally just duplicated it all the way around. You can see the spacer in there, just to make sure that no matter how level it was at least equidistant from the base of the unit. And then I put my jack in just to give a little mark really of where it needed to go. And again, I drilled, pre-drilled it. I actually used some, I think they're M4 bolts here, just a couple of washers and like one of those locking nuts to get it in place. It was not going anywhere. It was really, really strongly in there. So I'm not worried about it moving around. The nuts might need tightening over time, but not worried at all in the slightest. It was actually a really, really good fit. A lot of standing around and thinking. I've left those bits in on purpose because this did take a long time, this build. As I said, I think at some point I've said, it took about 2.5 days of solid grafting to get this done, and that's long days. And it was worth the effort, but because I did a lot of things I'd not done before and tried a lot of new techniques, I just wanted to take my time and make sure that I didn't, end up redoing them. So with that all in, here's the jack test, and you can see the router moving up and down. I'd also cable tied the sort of, I don't know, it's like a thumb thing that you turn to get the it's like a little clip you undo to get the router to move up and down. So I just cable tied that, and there you've got a very dodgy handheld aerial view of the router bit going up and down. It's sat quite low. The actual bit in the router here is sat quite low. With that done, I then went and attached the stop-start button. Here I'm just clamping it to get it in the right place. I've already attached it to the piece of wood, and I'm just filling in from the back with pocket hole screws. Again, you're not going to see all of this. A future build on this cart is going to cover a lot of this up with a couple of little interesting, hopefully, features. And when that was done, the last sort of main thing was to fit the casters on. So I just got another slither. This was actually a stretcher that I didn't end up using, had 2 of them. So I cut them to the right size, pre-drilled them, and then just attached them to the bottom of the cabinet. The reason that I did this is I wanted to get a more significant screw in through the caster, and I didn't want it to pierce the bottom of the unit. So I just set it back a bit, and to be honest, it didn't hurt because it raised the whole level of the cart, which is going to make it easier for me to use. But just really standard stuff. Just put the screws in. These casters are casters. They're not new ones. They're from I don't know, I think they might have been from my last swing top cart, but I got them in. They're all brakes, and then the last thing was just to get it off the bench. It's not overly heavy, but you wouldn't want to run up a hill with it on your back. But it's not massively heavy, to be honest, but it definitely feels sturdy. And the good thing is there isn't any sort of playing it back and forward. Like if you push it, it doesn't sort of move in any way. It's a very, very solid unit. So, fellow woodworkers, as you can see, the router table is finished. And what are my thoughts? Well, I've achieved what I set out to achieve, which was to incorporate the trend router table into a cart, which I have done. There have been so many new things that I've done on this build, new skills that I've acquired, new things I've attempted that I've never done before, and from that point of view, it is without a doubt a 10 out of 10 huge success. This was very much a build as it went. When I started, I didn't really have an idea of how I was going to get the router to raise up and down, and as you can see, the car jack on the front works really, really well. Now, this front part isn't finished, and there is a reason for that. There are a couple of things that are going in here that are going to be on an upcoming build, and I didn't want this video to spread over 3 or 4 different weeks. So there are 2 future builds coming up, one for this pocket in particular, and another one with a gap at the bottom and just boxing that in. But I'm very impressed with how it's turned out. It's been a mammoth build. It's taken me pretty much 2.5 whole days to build this, and again, a lot of that is down to the fact that there are techniques that I've not used before or new ways of doing things. I've had to do a bit of research, but it works fantastically well, and it's given me what I want, which is a proper router table solution. So Let me know in the comments what you think. Hopefully you agree with me. It's been a really good project, and hopefully you've got something from the video. If this is your first time at the Garage Workshop, please can I ask you to subscribe, like, comment, hit the notification bell. If you're a regular viewer, thank you so much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and again I hope you picked something up from it. Please let me know in the comments. Have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you on next week's edition of the Garage Workshop. Take care, fellow woodworkers.